So, a massive development in the United States today with an assassination attempt on the life of the former President of the United States, Donald Trump. Donald Trump was speaking at a rally in Pennsylvania. He's on the campaign trail looking for a second term in office as President of the United States. And while he was speaking at this campaign rally, there were shots fired at him, repeated shots, one of which hit him seemingly in the side of the head, but it just clipped his right ear, which led to some bleeding on his part. He collapsed onto the stage in very dramatic visual, is escorted off the stage by Secret Service agents. But the President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, is safe. But this has had a major impact on U.S. politics, state of the election, how America is seen in the world. So we'll just walk you through the entire story from the beginning. Basically, what happened was that on Saturday, which is at America time in the evening, former President Donald Trump was speaking at a rally and in Pennsylvania when several shots rang out. There was a shooter on a open roof about 150 yards from the president, and one of these shots, of course, hit the president. It killed one onlooker, one attendee of the rally, as well as two other individuals. We've got the visuals of that shooting for you right now. Right. So you've seen those visuals. Donald Trump collapses. He's bleeding. His neck is covered in blood. He's hurried off the stage by Secret Service agents and taken away from the scene. What we've got now are some of the details of what has happened. Essentially, conversations about a 20-year-old shooter identified by the FBI as Thomas Crooks, someone who was a Pennsylvania resident who took a shot at the president and injured former President Donald Trump. He was, of course, Mr. Crooks was then killed by the security forces that were there to protect former President Donald Trump. And then, of course, this investigation has begun into Mr. Crooks, who he was. Right now, first conversations going on about the fact that he was a registered Republican voter. The Republican Party, of course, is the party of President Donald Trump. So that is what we have in terms of the identity of the shooter, but we don't know what his motives were. That is currently being found out. We know that law enforcement agencies have raided his house and trying to figure out who this gentleman was, what his ideological motivations may have been. But we know that with the FBI, when they gave a briefing earlier in the day, they were unwilling to say that this was a one-off incident. They were just investigating to see whether there were other people involved in this conspiracy as well. But this Thomas Crooks is the name that we have at this point in time. Then President Donald Trump, of course, survived this attempt on his life and has been and was safely transported away. He landed in New Jersey, which is where he presumably is right now. But of course, we had instantly just this ring of condemnation in U.S. politics as well as from around the world about this attack on the life of former President Donald Trump. In fact, incumbent President Joe Biden, who is running against Donald Trump in the 2024 U.S. presidential election, actually had this to say. We're going to play his remarks for you right now.
He's with his doctors. Apparently he's doing well. I plan on talking to them shortly, I hope, when I get back to the telephone. Look, there's no place in America for this kind of violence. It's sick. It's sick. It's one of the reasons why we have to unite this country. We cannot allow for this to be happening. We cannot be like this. We cannot condone this. And I want to thank the Secret Service and all the agencies, including.
So you saw those remarks from President Joe Biden condemning what was happening, calling it sick, saying that this is America as a democracy. These sorts of things should not happen. There is no space for political violence in the United States. And of course, there was a ring of condemnation from all across the world. But what we also have for you is some of the clips from what the FBI, the Secret Service, the Pennsylvania State Police, they came together to give a joint press conference to tell people what they knew. This is, of course, a little dated. We'll continue to update you with the information, but this is what they said. We're playing that back for you right now.
This evening we had what we're calling an assassination attempt against our former president, Donald Trump. It's still an active crime scene. As I mentioned, we have a number of agents on scene. We also are working closely with other federal agencies, our state partners, and our local police partners as well. Again, at this time, we are not prepared to identify who the shooter is. We are close to that identification, and as soon as we are 100% confident in who that individual is, we will share it with the press. With that being said, also, we do not currently have an identified motive, although our investigators are working tirelessly to attempt to identify what that motive was.
The single greatest priority would be to identifying a motive and whether there was anyone else involved. At this time, we have no reason to believe that there is any other existing threat out there. And
so again, you can see there questions being asked of the security services about how this attack happened. And in fact, the big question right now in the aftermath of this attack is the investigation that will happen into the incidents of this assassination attempt. One of the big questions being asked, of course, is was there a security failure in ensuring the security of Donald Trump? There are big questions right now about how a shooter was able to acquire, slip past security, acquire a vantage point to, threaten the life of a presidential contender like Donald Trump. Because security services in the United States are professional, they are expected to forestall threats like this. Of course, that did not happen in this case. And there are big questions now being asked about whether there was a security failure, major questions being asked there. And in fact, we've seen this crescendo of calls for a investigation into what has happened from prominent politicians in the United States, Democrats, Republicans, the House of Representatives, lots of people coming out and saying that there must be an investigation. The head of the United States Security Service, Secret Service, also being called in to testify at some point in the near future. So, of course, big questions like how did this security failure happen? What were the motivations of Thomas Crooks? And are there any other individuals or groups involved in this assassination attempt? Will we see copycat attempts otherwise across the country against other presidential contenders as well? So that is where that is the big questions about the investigations. But leaving aside the issues about the investigation and the incident itself, let's talk about the repercussions that it has had for U.S. politics. Of course, you had major political leaders like former President Barack Obama coming out and saying that they absolutely condemn this violence against Donald Trump. You had major world leaders also come out, including the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. You had Prime Minister Narendra Modi put out a tweet condemning this violence against Trump. You also had major reactions coming in from around the world, whether it was Giorgia Meloni of Italy, Anthony Albanese of Australia, the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, really global leaders reacting and condemning what has happened in the United States. But the worrying thing, while the American political leadership and the global political leadership has come out to condemn what has happened, really what you're seeing is a partisan dogfight in the United States about why this assassination attempt took place. You have the Republican Party with major political figures like J.D. Vance and Tim Scott. These are two senators who are, of course, speculated to be in line to be Trump's vice president in the Republican National Convention in the next couple of days. They seem to insinuate that President Joe Biden's rhetoric about Donald Trump had, in fact, in many ways led to this sort of assassination attempt. And that's the American political right, conservative wing of American politics, has actually increasingly come out and said that if the left and let's say progressive politicians in America had not criticized Donald Trump as a threat to democracy, then something like this would not have happened. So this is a big political dogfight that is taking place at this point in time between the left and the right in the United States, and that points to really the massive political polarization that you're seeing in American society and in American politics today. That after an assassination attempt on a presidential candidate, someone who's had the lead in this election campaign against Joe Biden, you're seeing this kind of partisan bickering, which you have really not seen in the past in America, because we've seen attempts on the lives of presidents before. The last major one, of course, being the attempt at the life of President Ronald Reagan in 1981, and nothing like this followed that assassination attempt. President Reagan, of course, also survived an assassination attempt, and but there was no partisan bickering. But here you see just the divides. A moment that is supposed to unite a country in its condemnation of violence seems to have divided the country, which says a lot about U.S. politics. But let's also talk about some of the international implications of what this crisis would mean. Firstly, what it says about, like we said, political polarization. The big takeaway from this is that American politics is deeply polarized, and that has an impact for people sitting in India, for the global community, because domestic divisions at home will undoubtedly affect America's ability to project power abroad. You cannot be divided at home and somehow united on what your policy should be on the world stage. So absolutely, America's domestic divisions at home weaken it at a time where countries like India need a reasonably strong U.S. posture to take on challenges closer to home in the Indo-Pacific, in China, on China. And so definitely domestic divisions are worrying, especially since, as many Indian experts keep telling us, the United States is increasingly one of India's most consequential diplomatic relationships. To see domestic divisions in the country of this fashion will undoubtedly be worrying for India. We actually talked to the former Indian ambassador to the United States, Meera Shankar. We'll absolutely link you with that interview. We talked to her this morning, and she laid out exactly this point, that domestic divisions in America do actually have an impact on India. But the second big thing, right, that everyone would want to know about is, where does this leave the US presidential elections? And that's what we'll close out on. And the simple fact of the matter is that for a couple of weeks now, former President Donald Trump has actually been in the driver's seat in this campaign. After his first debate victory against Joe Biden, which happened in late June, if my memory serves me correctly, Biden's rather shambolic debate performance really exacerbated concerns about his age, about whether he was ready to serve another term as president of the United States. Remember, he's 81 years old. And after that, the narrative turned against Joe Biden. Former President Donald Trump had been locked in a neck-to-neck fight with the incumbent president, Joe Biden. But after the debate performance, Trump, who seemed to have won that debate, zoomed forward in many key battleground states and seemed set to maintain a bit of a lead over Joe Biden in this coming election campaign. But this assassination attempts totally transforms the political picture. Of course, we are getting ahead of ourselves here, but we have to give you a sense also of what this could mean, because in the past, when there have been attempts in the lives of presidents, their approval ratings have seen massive bumps, because, of course, as we understand, there's a strong sympathy wave for candidates, and especially so because Donald Trump was seen to have behaved himself or have conducted himself with dignity, because he was shot, but he got up, he punched his fist in the air. He seemed like that while he was rattled, it seemed like he was totally in control of himself. And even his critics, many of them have come out and said that he behaved with dignity and with control over his emotions, and so showing that a very presidential demeanor is what even some of his critics have come out to say. And that is undoubtedly going to stand him in good stead when you compare him to Joe Biden, who has increasingly faced numerous concerns about his age, about his frailty, about whether he's ready to do the job of president again for another 4 years. So Donald Trump, certainly his political brand getting a big boost, because remember, he relies on two things: his ability as a tough leader who can take decisions, and his view that he has been persecuted. He's a victim, persecuted by the establishment after a string of legal cases against him. Both of those two things, his brands, that toughness and that persecution complex, come together to create something that will really propel Trump's brand and energize his base. So there is definitely an expectation that Donald Trump will zoom ahead in the polls, at least in the short term, which will be worrying for President Biden and his campaign. and whether they will be able to turn that story around over the next 4 months will be the key issue. Remember that President Trump is now headed into the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, which is in the state of Wisconsin. It is going to happen in start tomorrow, and President Trump is expected to be nominated again as his party's nominee for the presidency. He is also going to name his vice president, and typically, because there's so much focus on the Republican Party, on whichever party holds his national convention, they always get a bump in the polls. They always dominate the national narrative. And for Trump, please just imagine this: for Trump to have taken a bullet essentially, and then come back within a day or two, and then make let's say a strong speech or make an appearance at this event and say that, look, I'm unfazed, I'm tough, I'm ready to take on this job, will undoubtedly do a great deal for his political brand and to convince swing voters that perhaps he is the man to lead the United States for another 4 years. But that's what we have for you right now in terms of the global reactions to this assassination attempt, what exactly happened, how it will impact US politics. We will keep you updated as we learn more. Thank you so much for watching India Today Global. I'm Shashank Batu, and we keep getting you the latest updates on this story.